The message wasn't meant to be heard. It slipped through the silence between stars like a whisper carried on a dying wind, thin and unstable, riding on radio frequencies so outdated that most of the galaxy had long since abandoned them. Across the vast communication lattice that bound thousands of worlds together, the signal flickered, weak, inconsistent, and almost immediately dismissed by automated systems designed to filter out noise. Almost. In a quiet sector of the Confederation relay network, an ancient listening array, one that had not been decommissioned simply because no one had bothered to remember it existed, caught the transmission and flagged it for manual review. At first, it was nothing more than static. Then patterns emerged. Repetition, structure, intent, a voice. The translation engine struggled at first, wrestling with a language that was inefficient, redundant, and strangely emotional in its construction. It lacked the precision of higher species dialects, the elegance of telepathic compression, the efficiency of quantum-coded thought. It was crude, but it was undeniably intelligent. By the time the signal reached the Central Council chamber, it had been cleaned, stabilized, and translated into standard Confederation format. Even then, it retained a certain roughness, as if the meaning itself resisted refinement. The chamber lights dimmed automatically as the message began to play. A soft hiss of static filled the vast space, followed by a pause that stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. Then the voice came. "We are the people of Earth." It was steady, not strong, not weak, just steady. Around the chamber, representatives from a dozen species shifted in their positions. Some leaned forward with mild curiosity, others barely reacted at all. The voice continued. "We represent the unified governments of our world. We have recently achieved the capability to transmit beyond our star system." A ripple of faint amusement moved through the chamber, subtle but present. On the far side of the room, a towering figure with segmented limbs and multifaceted eyes adjusted his stance slightly, focusing on the projection before him. Ambassador Zexthal had heard thousands of transmissions in his centuries of service. Most followed predictable patterns. This one was trying very hard not to. "We understand that we are not alone in the universe. We send this message in the hope of establishing peaceful contact with any civilization that may receive it." The words were simple, direct, almost naive, and yet there was something beneath them. Not desperation, not arrogance, hope. "We come in friendship. We seek knowledge, cooperation, and the opportunity to join a greater community among the stars." The final sentence lingered in the air, carried by a faint distortion in the signal before dissolving back into static. Silence followed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, somewhere to the left, a sharp clicking sound broke the stillness. Laughter, translated imperfectly from a species whose humor was based on frequency modulation. Others joined in, their reactions forming a quiet wave across the chamber. Some emitted low, rumbling tones. Others flashed bioluminescent patterns that signified amusement. Zexthal did not laugh. He studied the transmission as it looped silently on the display, his multiple eyes tracking the waveform, the structure, the inefficiencies. There was no compression beyond the most basic level. No encryption. No attempt to mask origin. They had included coordinates. Exact coordinates. That alone was unusual. Primitive species rarely announced their location so openly. Even those newly reaching into interstellar communication tended to exhibit at least a minimal instinct for caution. These humans had not. Either they did not understand the risks, or they understood them and chose to ignore them. Zexthal found that interesting. The projection shifted, replacing the waveform with a simple stellar map. A small, unremarkable yellow star blinked into focus near the outer edge of a minor spiral arm. Designation: Sol. Third planet highlighted. Population estimate: 8 billion. Technological classification. Early atomic industrial. No faster-than-light capability. No confirmed orbital defense grid. No recorded contact with any Confederation vessel. A single world, alone, in a galaxy that had long since outgrown such isolation. The message began to play again, the same steady voice cutting through the silence. We are the people of Earth. This time, Zexel listened more carefully, not to the words, to the tone. There was no tremor of fear, no hesitation, no attempt to posture beyond their capabilities. They were speaking into the unknown, fully aware that something might answer, and they were not afraid of that answer. That, more than anything else, held his attention. Around him, the quiet amusement of the chamber continued, fading only slightly as the novelty of the message wore off. For most, it was already categorized, filed, and mentally dismissed. Another primitive world reaching upward, another voice calling into the dark, another species that did not yet understand what waited for it beyond the boundaries of its own sky. Zexel remained still, his gaze fixed on the small blue marker that represented their world. The signal had been weak, primitive, easily overlooked, and yet, by pure chance or some subtle design, it had reached the one place in the galaxy where it would not be ignored. The message ended, the static faded, and in the silence that followed, something shifted, so slight that no one in the chamber consciously noticed it. But Zexel did, because for the first time in many cycles, a transmission from a Level 7 world had not bored him. It had made him curious. The chamber did not remain silent for long. Amusement, once sparked, rarely faded quickly among species that had spent millennia at the top of the galactic hierarchy. The soft echoes of laughter returned, spreading more freely now that the novelty of the message had settled into something far more familiar, predictable. Another voice among countless others that had reached upward from the dark, unaware of the weight that pressed down from above. A crystalline figure near the center of the chamber shimmered as it shifted its form, each movement producing a soft chiming resonance that translated into speech. "How quaint," it said, the tone carrying a refined sort of amusement. They announce themselves as if they expect an invitation. A low rumble followed from a massive, armored delegate, whose species communicated through vibrations in its plated exterior. The translation rendered it as laughter, though the original carried a sharper edge. "They offer knowledge," the being added, "from a civilization that has not even left its own system." More reactions followed, overlapping in a symphony of different biological expressions. Clicks, pulses, color shifts, electromagnetic bursts, all unified by a single shared sentiment: insignificance. Zexel allowed the responses to pass without interruption, his attention still fixed on the projection. The data continued to scroll, expanding upon the initial assessment with deeper analysis pulled from long-range scans and archived observation protocols. Atmospheric composition, stable, oxygen-nitrogen dominant. Biosphere, highly active, diverse. Industrial output, moderate, planet-bound. Military capability, localized, non-orbital. No energy shielding detected. No plasma-based weaponry. No quantum communication infrastructure. Each line reinforced the same conclusion. Primitive. The word carried a specific meaning within the Confederation. It was not an insult. It was a classification, a precise placement within a scale that measured not just technological advancement, but adaptability, efficiency, and long-term viability within a galactic framework. Level 7. Capable of self-annihilation. Incapable of defending against external threats. Zexel finally moved, one of his upper limbs extending toward the central interface. At his gesture, the display shifted again, pulling up comparative data from hundreds of similar civilizations encountered over the last several thousand cycles. Patterns emerged instantly. Initial contact, attempted diplomacy, integration, or removal. There were no other outcomes. A tall, serpentine delegate coiled slightly closer to the center, its elongated head tilting as it observed the data. They are early, it noted, far earlier than most who attempt direct contact. They are careless, another responded. Broadcasting their location so openly suggests a lack of strategic awareness, or a lack of experience, came a third voice, softer but no less dismissive. They do not yet understand the nature of the galaxy they have entered. That was closer to the truth. Zexthal expanded the data set further, isolating cultural indicators extracted from the transmission. The artifacts included with the message, mathematical sequences, fragments of visual art, structured sound patterns, were analyzed and categorized within moments. Mathematics, consistent but elementary. Physics, incomplete, though directionally accurate. Art, varied, emotionally driven, lacking refinement. Music, irregular but complex. He paused at that last classification, his gaze lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. There was a pattern within the sound data that did not align cleanly with their technological level. It was inefficient, structurally redundant, yet layered in a way that suggested an unusual cognitive approach to abstraction. He marked it for later review. Around him, the discussion continued to spiral in predictable directions. They will request membership, one delegate said. They already have, another replied, a faint ripple of amusement following the statement. And they will be denied. Of course, there was no debate in that conclusion. Membership within the Confederation was not granted to single-world species lacking interstellar capability. The structure of the organization required a certain level of autonomy, of expansion, of proven stability beyond a single point of failure. A civilization confined to one planet was not a partner. It was a variable, easily controlled, easily removed. Zexthal shifted his focus to the population data. 8 billion individuals, a significant number for a world of that classification, but not unprecedented. Many such species developed dense populations prior to achieving orbital independence. It often made integration more efficient. Labor distribution could be optimized. Resource extraction scaled rapidly. Compliance enforced through controlled relocation. He had overseen such processes before, dozens of times. The outcomes rarely varied. A new projection replaced the previous one, this time displaying a rotating image of the planet itself. Blue dominated the surface, broken by irregular landmasses covered in shifting patterns of green and brown. Artificial lights traced the darkened hemisphere, outlining dense clusters of habitation. It was vibrant, unusually so. Most worlds at that stage showed signs of ecological strain, their environments pushed toward collapse by unchecked industrial growth. This one still maintained a degree of balance, imperfect but functional. Another anomaly, minor but present. They are inefficient, the crystalline counselor stated again, as if reinforcing the conclusion made earlier. Their systems lack optimization. Their development path is disordered. Yet they unified. A quieter voice observed from the edge of the chamber. That drew a brief pause. Zexthal glanced toward the speaker, noting the subtle shift in attention from several nearby delegates. A single governing body, the voice continued. At this stage, that is not unusual, someone countered immediately. Many species consolidate prior to expansion. Not like this, the first replied. Not across an entire world with such cultural variance. Zexthal brought up the relevant data with a simple command. Political structures, historical conflicts, economic distribution. Fragments of information pieced together from intercepted transmissions and predictive modeling. The conclusion was incomplete, but the pattern was there. They had not unified through external pressure. They had done it themselves. Messy, inefficient, unstable by Confederation standards. And yet, it had worked. For now, the chamber dismissed the observation almost as quickly as it had surfaced. Irrelevant, a species could unify and still remain primitive. It did not change their classification. It did not alter the outcome. Zexthal let the data collapse back into the primary display, the image of the small blue world returning to the center of the chamber. A single planet, a single species, speaking into the void as if the void might answer with kindness. "They seek a place among us," the crystalline counselor said, its tone now carrying a hint of finality. "They will learn their place instead." Agreement followed. Quiet, absolute. Zexthal did not immediately respond. His gaze remained fixed on the rotating image, on the faint glow of artificial lights against the dark, on the fragile atmosphere clinging to the surface of a world that had no idea how exposed it truly was. Primitive, yes. Weak, undeniably. But there was something else there. Something the others had not bothered to look for. Not strength, not yet, but the potential for it. And in a galaxy where most outcomes were predictable long before they unfolded, even the smallest deviation was worth noting. The message had been simple, naive, even, but it had not been meaningless. Not to him. Not anymore. The classification reports were already complete before most of the council had stopped discussing the message. That was how these things usually went. Long before debate began, long before curiosity turned into policy, the machinery of the Confederation had already reduced entire civilizations into structured summaries, clean, numerical, and comfortably detached from anything resembling uncertainty. Zexthal reviewed the Earth profile again as it expanded across his interface. One world, 8 billion biological units, single atmosphere-bound civilization, early atomic age, partial orbital presence, no confirmed interstellar capability, no evidence of external contact. The system rendered it in color-coded tiers, each layer reinforcing the same conclusion in different visual forms. Efficient, final, comfortable, level 7 designation, contained risk, contained potential, contained future. From a strategic standpoint, the classification meant only one thing: manageable. A senior analyst's projection floated beside the data, updated in real time based on behavioral modeling extracted from the intercepted human transmission. Probability of peaceful compliance, high. Probability of resistance upon integration, low. Probability of systemic instability under Confederation governance, minimal. Probability of meaningful contribution to Confederation infrastructure, moderate over extended cycles. The model concluded with a simple recommendation: Standard Protectorate Assimilation Protocol. Zexthal did not immediately accept it. Instead, he isolated a subsection of the data, the portion detailing technological development curves. Humanity's progression was uneven, not linear like most Confederation-adjacent civilizations, not gradual refinement of existing systems. Instead, bursts, sharp, irregular leaps separated by long periods of stagnation, nuclear energy, orbital insertion, planetary communication networks, all achieved in compressed historical windows that did not align with standard evolutionary models. That was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species developed under environmental pressure that forced rapid adaptation. Others stumbled upon breakthroughs through sheer statistical inevitability. Still, something about the pattern refused to settle cleanly into predictability. Zexthal expanded the dataset further. Cultural output, scientific publications, recorded historical conflicts. The humans were noisy. Their data was saturated with contradiction, cooperation and violence, expansion and fragmentation. Unity achieved not through instinct, but through sustained conflict resolution across incompatible systems. It should have resulted in collapse, According to standard Confederation sociological frameworks, a species with that level of internal variance should fracture before achieving planetary cohesion. Yet Earth had not. It had persisted, evolved, unified. A subordinate officer drifted closer to the central projection, their translucent body pulsing faintly as they reviewed the same data. "They are unstable," the officer concluded. "Most emerging civilizations are," Zexthel replied without looking away. "This instability is structural," the officer insisted. "Their governance models contradict themselves across regional clusters. Their resource distribution is inefficient. Their ideological frameworks are incompatible. And yet they function," Zexthel said. A pause. That was not a statement most analysts were comfortable with. Functionality was not the same as stability within Confederation doctrine. A system could appear operational while still trending toward collapse. Many Level 7 civilizations had demonstrated that principle before. The officer adjusted their stance slightly. "Function is temporary," they said. "Without optimization, collapse is inevitable." "Perhaps," Zexthel allowed, but he did not remove Earth from his focus. Instead, he overlaid another layer of analysis: military capacity projection. The result was even more straightforward than before. No interstellar fleet, no energy-based weapon systems, no defensive orbital grid capable of sustained engagement, ground-based nuclear deterrence, atmospheric aircraft fleets, chemical propulsion systems. In isolation, each component was obsolete by Confederation standards. Together, they formed what the system classified as localized defensive capability with no external viability. In simpler terms, they could only fight where they already lived, and anything that reached them from beyond their sky would arrive unchallenged. The projection shifted again, now simulating a hypothetical Confederation intervention. The outcome was instantaneous: complete planetary dominance achieved within hours, resource extraction initiated within days, population management stabilized within cycles, minimal resistance projected, minimal casualties required, maximum efficiency. Zexthel watched the simulation run 3 times. The result did not change. It rarely did. A different delegate entered the analysis stream, their tone carrying the familiar confidence of long-established precedent. "They will accept protectorate status," the delegate said. "They always do once presented with the scale of Confederation capability." "And if they refuse?" another asked. A brief pause, then a quiet answer. "Then they will be corrected." The language was soft, almost polite, but the meaning behind it was absolute. Correction did not imply negotiation. It implied adjustment, forced alignment with a predefined outcome. Zexthel brought the human transmission back into focus. "We come in friendship." The phrase repeated again, now stripped of emotional context by repeated analysis. Friendship, a concept heavily dependent on mutual parity, something the Confederation rarely encountered in first contact scenarios. He zoomed in on the origin point again. Sol system, 3rd planet, a small blue sphere, suspended in the outer reaches of a relatively quiet arm of the galaxy. So unremarkable that it had been catalogued and ignored for cycles before the signal appeared, and yet the fact that it had sent the signal at all meant something important. Intent, not accident, not leakage. Intent. The humans had chosen to speak outward, knowing nothing of what might respond. That alone separated them from many Level 7 civilizations that preferred isolation until forced exposure. A calculated risk, or an uncalculated one. Zexthel could not yet decide which. Around him, the Chamber's discussion had shifted from curiosity to procedural certainty. The novelty had worn off. What remained was policy, dispatch protocol, assessment mission, integration framework, resource evaluation, the language of expansion, The language of ownership, without calling it ownership. Zexthel finally spoke, his voice steady as the data continued to scroll. They included coordinates, he said. A few heads turned slightly. Yes, the crystalline counselor replied. Standard exploratory mistake. It will simplify contact procedures. Or, Zexthel continued, it indicates they are not attempting to avoid contact at all. That drew a brief pause. A ripple of reconsideration passed through the immediate group, subtle but noticeable. A species that signals its exact location without defensive caution is either unaware of danger or indifferent to it. The Confederation typically assumed the former. It was statistically safer, but Zexthel did not immediately accept that assumption. He replayed the tone of the message again. We come in friendship, not fear, not submission, not even desperation, just expectation, as if contact was not a threat to be managed, but a natural step in an already understood process. That expectation was misplaced, but it was also consistent, consistently confident. The projection of Earth rotated slowly in front of him, the thin atmosphere shimmering faintly against the darkness of space. A fragile world, yes, but not silent, not passive, not unaware. It had spoken, and in the Confederation's long history, anything that spoke into the void, expecting an answer, had eventually received one. The decision did not take long. In truth, it had already been made before the discussion began. What remained was ceremony, structure, the illusion of consideration. The Confederation did not expand through impulse. It expanded through procedure. Every new world, every new species, every new voice from the dark was processed through the same layered system of evaluation that had been refined over millennia. Earth was no different. It never was. Zexthel stood among the delegation as the High Counselor's projection stabilized at the center of the chamber. The ancient being's presence carried weight, not because of physical size, but because of time. Centuries of accumulation, cycles upon cycles of precedent, decisions layered upon decisions until authority itself became indistinguishable from inevitability. The message from Earth replayed once more in the background. We come in friendship. It felt smaller now, not less important, just contained. The High Counselor spoke, without preamble. This species has acknowledged contact and expressed intent for peaceful integration. No one interrupted. Preliminary analysis confirms Level 7 classification. The projection of Earth rotated slowly beside the statement, as if the world itself was being examined one final time before judgment. The Confederation will extend standard diplomatic contact. A pause, then the shift, and protectorate terms. That was the moment the language changed. Not in meaning, but in tone. Protectorate was a word designed to sound gentle, structured, benevolent. It implied guidance, stability, security. But everyone in the chamber understood its function. Control without naming control. The High Counselor continued. A diplomatic vessel will be dispatched under neutral engagement protocols, assessment of resource capacity, labor integration potential, and planetary governance restructuring will follow standard procedures. Zexthel watched as the directives populated across the shared network. Everything was already arranged. The ship, the crew, the timeline, the expected outcome. He had seen this pattern before, so many times that the edges of it had begun to blur. A species speaks. A species is evaluated. A species is guided, or it is corrected. The language never changed, even when the outcomes did. Around him, the delegates responded in predictable ways, some with approval, some with mild anticipation, a few with quiet amusement, already picturing the inefficiency of a single-world civilization attempting to negotiate its place among the stars. A militaristic delegate spoke first. They will comply once they understand scale, it said. Primitive species always do. A second voice followed. If they resist, The standard deterrence display will be sufficient. Unlikely to require escalation, added another. The consensus formed quickly, not because of certainty, because of repetition. Zexthal remained silent. His attention drifted briefly to the projection of Earth again. Still there, still rotating, still unaware of the conversation, determining its immediate future. High Counselor Yethnan's voice entered the chamber again, older than most civilizations currently represented within it. Ambassador Zexthal will lead the contact mission aboard the Ascendant Glory. The vessel designation appeared instantly in the shared display. Mid-tier diplomatic cruiser, armed, not for war, for reassurance. A reminder of what waited behind diplomacy if diplomacy failed. You will extend Confederation greetings, the counselor continued. You will present protectorate terms. You will assess compliance readiness. A pause. Then the final instruction. If the species resists integration, report immediately. Further action will be authorized. The implication did not need to be spoken. It rarely did. Zexthal inclined his head slightly. I understand. The counselor's projection dimmed. The meeting transitioned into procedural closure. Delegates began to withdraw, their forms dissolving into corridors of shifting light, transmission fields activating as they returned to their respective vessels or systems. But Zexthal did not move immediately. He remained in place, watching the empty space where Earth had been displayed moments before. A junior analyst approached beside him, adjusting their interface nervously. Ambassador, they said carefully, the probability models still indicate minimal resistance. Yes, Zexthal replied. The analyst hesitated. Then there is no concern. It was not a question. Zexthal finally turned his gaze slightly. No, he said. There is no concern. A pause. Then, quieter. There is only outcome. The analyst seemed satisfied by that answer. They departed, but Zexthal did not. Instead, he reviewed the mission parameters one more time. Arrival window, 20 standard cycles. First contact, open communication. Second phase, cultural exchange and assessment. Third phase, integration proposal. Failure condition, resistance. Resolution, enforcement protocol. Simple, clean, efficient, and yet something about the simplicity felt incomplete. Not wrong, just insufficient. He had been part of enforcement protocols before. He had seen worlds that resisted, worlds that collapsed, worlds that submitted quietly and disappeared into administrative absorption. Earth did not yet belong in any of those categories, not because of strength, not because of technology, but because of the tone of its message. We come in friendship. It was not a plea. It was not a warning. It was an introduction. Zexthal stepped away from the central chamber and into the transit corridor that led toward the departure docks. The station around him hummed with controlled motion, delegates, officers, analysts, all moving within predefined paths toward predefined roles. Everything orderly, everything predictable, except the faint inconsistency he could not quite dismiss. As he walked, the ship's internal network updated him automatically. Humanity profile appended. Cultural baseline expanded. Psychological model refined. He paused briefly as a new subfile opened without prompt. Human historical conflict resolution patterns. It showed wars, then peace treaties, then reunification cycles, then technological leaps following periods of near collapse. Adaptation through pressure. Survival through escalation. Progress through crisis. Zexthal studied it longer than necessary, because one pattern repeated more than any other. They did not stabilize when left alone. They stabilized when challenged. His mandibles shifted slightly in thought. Behind him, the Confederation continued its quiet certainty. Ahead of him, the mission waited. And somewhere far beyond the station hull, a small blue world continued to rotate in silence, still unaware that its simple message of friendship had already been interpreted, classified, and scheduled for correction if necessary. Zextal finally resumed walking, but the thought remained with him longer than he expected, not what they were, but what they would become when the galaxy stopped assuming they would remain the same. Secretary General Chun did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The silence in the human delegation chamber was already heavy enough to bend attention toward her words. Across from her, the Confederation envoy stood like a monument of controlled superiority, towering, multi-limbed, and utterly certain of its own conclusions. Zextal watched her carefully, not because she was threatening, because she was not, and yet she did not behave like prey either. That was the first inconsistency. The second was her posture, not submissive, not defiant, in the emotional sense the Confederation expected from primitive species under pressure, but anchored, as if the outcome of the conversation had already been accepted internally, regardless of what was being offered. Zextal had seen fear before. He had seen bargaining. He had seen collapse. This was none of those. "You are offering us protectorate status," she said calmly. "Yes," Zextal replied, maintaining formal tone. "Under Confederation law, this ensures protection, stability, and integration into a greater interstellar framework. And in return," she continued, "you would oversee our governance, our resources, and our military capability." A pause. Then Zextal answered honestly, "Yes." No embellishment, no softening. The human delegation exchanged brief glances, subtle but synchronized. Not confusion, coordination, as if they were confirming something among themselves that did not require words. Chin nodded once. "I see." A single phrase. Neither acceptance nor rejection. Just acknowledgement. Then she spoke again. "Ambassador Zextal, before we respond formally, I would like to confirm something." He tilted slightly. "You may ask." Her gaze held steady. "If we accept your protectorate status, do we retain sovereignty over our species' decisions, or are those transferred to Confederation administration?" The question caused a faint ripple through the alien delegation, not because it was complex, because it was unnecessary. The answer was already embedded in the concept. Zextal responded carefully, as protocol required clarity in first contact legal frameworks. "Operational sovereignty is delegated under oversight," he said. "Strategic governance is integrated into Confederation administrative systems to ensure compliance with interstellar standards." Translation simplified. You decide nothing that matters beyond your world. Chin listened without interruption. Then she nodded again. "I understand." Another pause followed, longer this time. The alien delegation interpreted it as hesitation. Zextal did not. He was beginning to recognize a different pattern. Humans did not fill silence with panic. They filled it with thought. Finally, Chin spoke again. "I want to share something with you before we give our answer." A subtle shift passed through the room. This was irregular. First contact protocols did not typically include unsolicited cultural statements at this stage, but Zextal allowed it. "Proceed," he said. Chin turned slightly, and a holographic display activated behind her. Not Confederation technology. Human, cruder, less efficient, but functional. Images appeared. Cities, skies, oceans, war, then reconstruction, then more cities, then crowded orbital stations, barely clinging to Earth's gravity well. "Our species has experienced fragmentation, unification, collapse, and rebuilding," she said. "We have fought each other more times than we can count." The images shifted. Industrial revolutions, nuclear detonations, global communication networks, mass cooperation systems emerging from crisis points. "We do not claim to be peaceful by nature," she continued. "We are not inherently stable. We are not inherently unified." A pause. Then the core statement. "We are adaptable. The word hung in the air differently than anything the Confederation had classified before. Not stability, not hierarchy, not compliance. Adaptability. Zexthel observed the data, overlay, instantly attempt to categorize it. It struggled. Chin continued. Every time we have been pushed toward extinction, we have responded by becoming something else. The display shifted again. Satellite networks, automated systems, deep ocean habitats, early interplanetary infrastructure. And now, she said, turning her gaze back toward Zexthel, you arrive telling us that we are not ready to be independent in a larger galaxy. A faint silence settled. The Confederation delegation waited for emotional escalation. It did not come. Instead, clarity. You are correct in one sense, Chin said. We are not ready. Zexthel's mandibles tightened slightly. That was not the expected response. She continued, we are not ready because we have not yet been challenged at that scale. A subtle shift in tone, not defiance, not aggression, recognition. Asking us to surrender our sovereignty now is like asking a child to give up walking because running exists somewhere in the future. A pause. Then she stepped forward slightly. And we decline. The words were not loud, but they landed with weight that the room did not immediately process. One of the alien delegates emitted a sharp vibration, surprise or disbelief translated through non-human biology. Another shifted color patterns rapidly. Zexthel remained still. For the first time in many cycles, he did not immediately respond. Chin continued before he could. We understand your power, she said. We saw your demonstration. A flicker of the destroyed island appeared in the holographic reflection of her eyes. We understand what you could do to us. Another pause. And we also understand what we would become if we allowed you to decide our future for us. Her expression did not change, but we choose uncertainty over submission. Silence. Absolute. For a brief moment, even the ambient systems of the ship seemed to hesitate, as if recalibrating what category of response to expect. Zexthel finally spoke. You are aware, he said slowly, that refusal is not typically followed by continued autonomy. Chin nodded. Yes, that single word again. No hesitation, no illusion, just acknowledgement of consequence. Zexthel studied her for a long moment. Across countless worlds, he had seen leaders attempt resistance. He had seen bravado collapse under pressure. He had seen belief fracture when confronted with overwhelming disparity. This was not that. This was informed refusal. He realized something uncomfortable. They were not misunderstanding the Confederation. They were understanding it completely and choosing anyway. The realization created a silence of its own. Finally, Zexthel spoke again, his tone now more formal. Then I am required to inform you, he said, that Confederation policy will proceed accordingly. Chen inclined her head slightly. We expected that. A pause. Then almost gently, Ambassador Zexthel, we are not your enemy. The statement landed differently than anything before it, not as defiance, not as submission, as separation. As long as you allow us to remain independent, she continued, there is no need for hostility. Zexthel held her gaze. For the first time, the Confederation's classification system felt insufficient, because it had no category for a species that understood the consequence of its own extinction and still refused to yield. Not out of ignorance, but intent. He finally responded, your position is noted. A formal phrase, but for the first time, it felt incomplete even as he said it. Behind him, the ship's systems quietly updated the mission profile. Compliance probability recalculated. Resistance likelihood increased. Anomaly classification flagged. Zexthel did not look at it. Instead, he watched the small group of humans standing across from him, fragile by every measurable metric, surrounded by beings who could end their world with a thought. And yet, they did not step back. The decision, when it came, would no longer be about misunderstanding. It would be about what the galaxy did when something refused to behave according to its expectations. And somewhere deep in that realization, Zexthel understood the nature of what had just begun. The demonstration was not scheduled as a warning. It was scheduled as a lesson, a controlled correction of perspective. Zexthel stood on the observation deck as the ascendant glory drifted into position above Earth's orbital plane. Around him, the bridge crew moved with practiced precision, each action already rehearsed in simulations designed for primitive world encounters. Below, the blue planet rotated quietly, unaware of how small it appeared from this distance, unaware of how easily it could be changed. Captain Corton's voice came through the command channel. Orbital alignment complete. Targeting solution locked. Zexthel did not respond immediately. His attention remained on the planet, on the thin scattering of artificial lights along its night side, on the fragile web of civilization clinging to a single surface. Confirm target, Corton pressed. Zexthel finally answered. Uninhabited landmass only, he said. No populated zones. Confirmed, the weapons officer replied. Island region designated. No biosignatures detected. A pause. Then the system chimed. Weapons charged. Across the ship's spine, energy conduits began to glow, faint at first, then intensifying as containment fields stabilized raw plasma output. The hum was low, almost imperceptible, but it carried weight, power, control, superiority. Zexthel had seen this moment before on dozens of worlds. The same silence, the same anticipation, the same outcome. On the human shuttle, still docked within the diplomatic bay, Earth's delegation was watching through reinforced observation glass. They had not been asked to leave. That was intentional. Witnessing was part of the lesson. Secretary General Chun stood at the front, arms relaxed at her sides, expression unreadable. Not fear, not defiance. Observation. Zexthel studied her briefly. Still no reaction, no visible panic response. Most species at this stage displayed instinctive stress behavior. Even the most disciplined civilizations showed some physiological shift when confronted with planetary-scale weapons. Humans did not, or perhaps they were simply better at hiding it. Firing sequence initiated, Corton announced. The ascendant glory adjusted its orientation by a fraction of a degree. That fraction mattered. It ensured precision. It ensured inevitability. The main emitter focused. Energy condensed. Space itself seemed to tighten around the weapon's discharge point. Demonstration strike. In 3, 2. Zexthel watched Earth one final time. A small part of him registered something faintly irrational. A pause in the expected rhythm of procedure. Then the beam fired. It was not visible at first. Only a distortion. A tear in perception, where energy exceeded normal sensory translation. Then light followed. A column of concentrated force lanced downward across the void, striking the designated coordinate on the planetary surface. The impact did not produce an explosion in the conventional sense. It produced absence. A section of the ocean disappeared in a perfect vertical line. For a fraction of a second, water stood in place where physics no longer applied. Then reality collapsed inward. The island was gone, not destroyed, not broken, removed. The ocean did not boil immediately. It hesitated, as if uncertain how to respond to the missing mass. Then it filled the void violently, collapsing inward with catastrophic force that sent shockwaves across the surrounding waters. A circular glass-like structure formed at the impact site, extending deep into the crust where heat had fused matter into a single reflective surface. Silence filled the bridge. The weapons system powered down. Cooling fields stabilized. Energy levels returned to baseline. Impact confirmed, Corton said. No celebration followed. There was never celebration, Only confirmation. Zexthel observed the result. Technically flawless. Precisely executed. A standard demonstration strike. And yet, something about it felt heavier than intended. He dismissed the thought. It was irrelevant. The objective had been achieved. On the human shuttle, there was no sound, no shouting, no visible collapse, only stillness. Zexthel studied them again. Secretary General Chun remained standing. Her gaze was fixed on the holographic projection of the destroyed island. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm. Too calm. A very precise strike, she said. No tremor. No escalation. Just acknowledgement. Zexthel responded formally. This is standard Confederation capability. Your world possesses no defensive systems capable of resisting equivalent force. Another pause. Then Corton added, almost casually, we could repeat this across every major population center on your planet within hours. The statement was not meant as threat. It was mathematics. The human delegation did not react outwardly, but something subtle shifted in the air between them. Not fear, not yet. Understanding. Chin finally turned slightly toward the alien delegation, and this was meant to convince us of what exactly. The question was not emotional. It was analytical. Zexthel answered, that resistance is not viable. A simple statement. Absolute within Confederation doctrine. Chin nodded once. I see. Then she looked back at the hologram. The destroyed island. The perfect absence where land had once existed. Then I suppose you should understand something as well, she said quietly. Zexthel's attention sharpened slightly. Something in her tone had changed. Not emotionally. Structurally. Like a system switching modes. You assume, she continued, that what you just demonstrated is overwhelming force. A pause. On the bridge, several officers shifted subtly. This was not part of expected response pathways. Chun raised her hand slightly. A gesture. Behind her. The shuttle's internal systems activated. Not Confederation tech. Human. The display changed. The destroyed island reappeared. Reconstructed. But now layered with additional data. Energy dispersion models. Impact analysis. Thermal spread mapping. Geological stress simulation. Zexthel's interface automatically began processing the incoming feed. Corton frowned. What is this? Chin answered. Your weapon output profile. Another pause. Then she added, thank you for the data. Silence. The words did not immediately register as threatening. Only later did they begin to. Zexthel's mandibles tightened slightly. Chin continued. That was useful. A faint shift occurred in the human delegation. Subtle repositioning. Not panic. Coordination. Zexthel's instincts flagged it immediately. This was no longer passive observation. This was assessment. Your weapon, Chin said, is powerful. She looked directly toward the observation deck. But it is not unique. A pause. Then the final line. And now we understand it. On the bridge, alarms did not sound. There was no breach. No attack. No anomaly detected. And yet, for the first time since arrival, Zexthel felt something that had no place in Confederation classification systems. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition that something had changed without permission. Below them, Earth remained silent. But somewhere beneath that silence, systems were already reacting. And the lesson the Confederation intended to deliver had, without announcement or warning, begun to reverse direction. The return to orbit should have brought clarity. Instead, it brought waiting. And waiting, in the Confederation Navy, was never neutral. It was pressure. Zexthel stood on the bridge of the Ascendant Glory as Earth rotated below them, calm and indifferent, as if nothing had changed at all. The demonstration strike site remained visible on long-range scans, a perfect wound etched into the surface of an otherwise unbroken world. A reminder, or at least it was supposed to be. Surface response. Corton asked. None. The science officer replied. No military mobilization? None that fits known engagement profiles. Corton clicked his mandibles, once in irritation. Still no panic broadcasts. A pause. Then, continued global communication activity, the officer said. But not panic. Coordination. That word again. Coordination. Zexthel did not look away from Earth. He had expected fear response curves to spike immediately after the strike. Civilizations at this stage typically fractured under demonstration pressure. Governments collapsed. Internal conflict surged. Communication systems overloaded with distress signals. That was the standard pattern. But Earth was not following it. Instead, their networks had intensified in a different way. Structured bursts of communication, synchronized data exchange, industrial energy draw increasing in precise, distributed clusters rather than chaotic surges. It did not look like collapse. It looked like preparation. Are they attempting evacuation? Corton asked. Partially, the science officer replied, but not across major population centers. Only select regions. Strategic assets, another officer suggested. Or leadership nodes, Corton added. Zexthel finally spoke. Continue monitoring. His tone was controlled, but something subtle had shifted beneath it. He was no longer observing a predictable system. He was observing a system adapting under pressure. That was different. On the human shuttle, the atmosphere was unchanged. Secretary General Chun stood before the same interface as before, now filled with data overlays streaming in from Earth's surface. She was speaking quietly to her own command network. Zexthel could not hear the words, but he could see the pattern. Orders being issued, confirmed, executed. No delay, no hesitation. A subordinate officer near Zexthel leaned closer to the tactical display. Still no retaliation, they said. Not even a probe launch. Primitive hesitation, Corton replied. They are calculating their extinction threshold. Zexthel did not respond immediately, because something about that assumption no longer fit. The humans were not behaving like a species calculating survival under overwhelming force. They were behaving like a species gathering information, testing boundaries, measuring responses. The realization settled slowly, uncomfortably. A low-frequency alert chirped across the bridge. Not a threat alarm, a diagnostic anomaly. Long-range sensors reporting irregular gravitational noise, the science officer said. Corton turned. Define irregular. Mass distributions appearing and disappearing across low-orbit tracking resolution, not consistent with natural debris fields. Zexthel stepped forward slightly. Show me. The display shifted. At first, nothing. Then faint distortions appeared around Earth's orbital plane. Small inconsistencies. Gaps in expected sensor returns. Like something interfering with detection. Or something choosing not to be seen. That's sensor drift, Corton dismissed. No, the science officer replied slowly. It's structured. Zexthel's attention sharpened. Explain. The officer recalibrated the feed. The distortions aligned. Patterns emerged. Not random, not noise. Repeating clusters of absence. Equidistant spacing. Orbital synchronization. Corton leaned in. That's not possible, he said. There's nothing in that region. The science officer hesitated. Then, why does it behave like there is? Silence. Zexthel felt it then. A shift in the atmosphere of the bridge itself. Subtle recalibration of understanding. Not fear yet, but erosion of certainty. A second alert triggered. This one closer. Short-range orbital detection. Unidentified signal source detected. The communications officer announced. Origin. Multiple points. Earth surface. But also not just Earth. Corton snapped his attention fully. Clarify. The officer's voice tightened. The signal is being broadcast simultaneously from dozens of orbital coordinates we do not have registered. "That's impossible," Corton said immediately. "Agreed," the officer replied. Zexthel did not speak, because he had already begun to understand what that meant. If the signal was not coming from a single point, then it was not a broadcast. It was a network, a distributed system, point one that had not been detected during entry. Because it had not chosen to be detected, the bridge lights flickered once. A minor fluctuation in power distribution, barely noticeable, except it repeated, across multiple systems. Not failure, interference. Then a voice entered the communication channel, not through standard Confederation transmission protocols, but directly, every console simultaneously, every speaker, every interface. A single coordinated signal. Confederation Vessel Ascendant Glory. This is Earth Defense Command. Zexthel's mandibles tightened. The voice was human, calm, structured, not emotional, controlled like a military transmission. Corton reacted first. Trace the source. Unable. The communications officer said immediately. Why? Because there is no single source. Silence followed. Then the voice continued. You are currently within controlled orbital space. A pause. Measured, not rushed. Your weapon's discharge earlier has been recorded and analyzed. Another pause. Thank you for your cooperation. Corton turned sharply toward Zexthel. They're mocking us. But Zexthel did not respond, because the tone did not match mockery. It matched confirmation. Like a system receiving expected input, the voice continued. You are advised to maintain current orbital position. A slight shift in tone, not threatening, informational. Movement outside designated corridors will result in defensive response. Corton laughed once. Short, disbelieving. Defensive response. From what? Zexthel's gaze remained fixed on the planetary display, because something new had appeared, not on sensors, but on visual feed, structures, not visible before, now resolving slowly as sensor filters adjusted. Orbital silhouettes, massive, too large for conventional detection thresholds to have missed unless deliberately concealed or masked. Corton stopped laughing. What are those? Science officer voice dropped slightly. I don't know. The human voice returned, calm, unchanged. You were shown one of our defensive systems earlier. A pause. You may now observe the rest. And then the space around Earth began to shift, not suddenly, not explosively, but like a curtain being drawn back. One by one, objects resolved into existence. Stations, platforms, vessels, not primitive, not improvised, structured, layered, integrated into orbital mechanics with precision that made Confederation engineering look like an early draft. Corton stepped back slightly. That's not a level 7 capability, he said quietly. Zexthel said nothing, because he was already recalculating classification thresholds, and they were failing. The human voice returned one final time. You have entered restricted observation zone. A pause. Further demonstration of force is discouraged. Then almost gently, we prefer you remain where you are. Silence followed, but it was no longer empty silence. It was occupied by presence, by awareness, by something the Confederation had not accounted for in its initial assessment. Zexthel finally spoke. Maintain position, he ordered quietly. Corton turned sharply. Ambassador. Maintain position, Zexthel repeated, because for the first time since entering the system, he understood something critical. The humans had not been reacting to the Confederation. They had been waiting for it to finish revealing itself. And now that it had begun, they were no longer guessing. They were responding. The Confederation fleet did not arrive as an invasion. It arrived as certainty. 12 warships emerging from faster-than-light transition and perfect formation, each one carrying centuries of doctrine, conquest history, and the confidence of an empire that had never needed to question its superiority. Admiral Krixta stood at the center of the formation aboard the Inevitability Conquest, watching Earth expand across the main display. A single blue world, fragile, isolated, defended by nothing visible. "Report," he commanded. "System stable," his tactical officer replied. "Ascendant Glory, holding orbit as expected. No detected planetary defense activation." Krixta's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. "Any change since our last scan?" "Only increased energy signatures from surface infrastructure. Industrial output rising. Civilian evacuation patterns confirmed in multiple regions." A pause. Still no fleet response. The officer hesitated. "None detected, Admiral." Krixta exhaled slowly. Predictable. Even now, even after witnessing Confederation firepower, the humans were reacting like every other Level 7 civilization. Panic first, collapse second, surrender third. He turned slightly toward the diplomatic channel. "Zexthal status." The ambassador's image flickered onto the display. Something about him felt different. Not physically, behaviorally, controlled still, but less certain. "The humans have not complied," Zexthal said. Krixta's tone sharpened. "Have they refused again?" "Yes." A pause. Krixta's mandibles tightened. "Then we proceed." On Earth, the sky above several continents changed. Not visibly at first, but observably in instruments. Orbital energy readings surged as the squadron adjusted formation, preparing a demonstration strike calibrated for psychological compliance. A controlled application of fear. A lesson written in physics. Krixta opened a general broadcast channel. "People of Earth," he transmitted, "this is your final warning." His voice carried across the planet's communication infrastructure. "We have given you opportunity for peaceful submission. You have rejected it." A pause. "Your leadership has failed to recognize the reality of your position." In the command bridge, officers monitored planetary reactions. Still structured communication activity. Still coordination. But now faster. Tighter. More synchronized. "Begin targeting," Krixta ordered. Weapons systems aligned across the fleet. Energy cores stabilizing. Plasma conduits glowing like artificial stars. Primary demonstration. Strike selected. Tactical officer confirmed. Large continental industrial complex. Minimal population density. Execute. Across space, 12 ships prepared to fire. On Earth, something unexpected happened. The Confederation's signal networks suddenly experienced feedback, not interference. Response. A counter-signal entered their communication arrays with perfect clarity. Krixta's bridge froze. "Admiral," communications officer said sharply, "we are receiving an incoming broadcast on all frequencies." "That's impossible," Krixta snapped. "Suppress it." "We can't." The voice came through, not distorted, not delayed, immediate. "Confederation fleet," it said. "This is Earth Defense Command." Krixta leaned forward slightly, so they still insisted on this fiction. Defense. Against an entire fleet. "Cease your targeting," the voice continued calmly. "You are operating within active defensive perimeter." Krixta gave a short, humorless laugh. "And if we do not?" A pause. Then you will engage systems you do not understand." On the bridge, tension shifted. Not fear yet, but irritation. Arrogance challenged. "Admiral," tactical officer said, "orbital sensor networks are detecting anomalies." "Define anomalies." "Massive structures emerging from stealth fields across low orbit." Krixta's eyes narrowed. "Stealth fields." Confirming multiple cloaked installations becoming visible. The display changed. At first, nothing. Then space around Earth began to populate. Slowly, deliberately, like something revealing itself only when acknowledged. Orbital platforms, defense rings, fleet anchors, and ships. Not few, not dozen, hundreds. No, Thousands. Krixta went still. That's not possible, he said quietly. But even as he spoke, more appeared. Hidden mass shadows, collapsing into visible form as detection thresholds were breached and countermeasures disengaged. The human voice returned. You are now observing designated defensive assets. Krixta's grip tightened on his command rail. Those ships were not in our scans, he said. Science officer voice was low. They were not present in detectable spectrum. Admiral. Krixta turned sharply. Explain. Silence. Because there was no explanation that fit existing doctrine. Then something worse happened. A second fleet signature appeared. Not Confederation. Human, but not Earth-originating design alone. Hybridized. Modified. Reconstructed from known Confederation schematics. Krixta felt a cold realization spread through his chest. Those are our systems, he said slowly. The science officer hesitated. Modified versions, yes. Krixta stared at the display. That's impossible. The human voice returned. You are correct, it said. A pause. We did not build them from scratch. Krixta's mandibles tightened. The voice continued. We studied you first. On the bridge, silence deepened. The tactical officer spoke, carefully. Admiral, we are detecting something else. Report. Energy signatures from the surface are matching Confederation command encryption patterns. Krixta turned slowly. That's not possible. The officer swallowed. It is identical, Admiral. They are using our own command protocols. A pause. Adapted. Krixta felt something unfamiliar press against his thoughts. Not fear. Not yet. But recognition of a pattern he had seen only once before in history records. When civilizations stopped being prey, the human voice returned. You arrived expecting ignorance. Another pause. We prepared instead. Space shifted again. And then the human fleet revealed itself fully. Not defensive, not reactive, but positioned. Already aligned. Already aimed. Krixta finally understood the truth. They had not been discovered today. They had been expected. And somewhere in the silence between stars, the Confederation fleet realized it was no longer entering unknown territory. It was entering a system that had already decided what it would allow. Krixta had fought in 17 suppression campaigns. He had never once seen a battlefield that refused to behave like a battlefield. This was not resistance. It was architecture. The human fleet hung in orbit with unnatural stillness, not dispersing, not charging, not reacting the way any rational military doctrine dictated. It was positioned, waiting, like a net already tightened. Admiral, tactical officer said quietly, all Confederation vessels are within effective engagement envelopes of unknown origin weapon systems. Krixta's mandibles clicked once. Unknown origin is not a classification, he said sharply. Identify them. A pause. Then the officer replied, Confederation-derived frameworks, Admiral, modified beyond registry recognition. Krixta turned slowly toward the display, and there it was again, that impossible pattern. Their own engineering language reflected back at them, rewritten by someone who understood not just function, but intent. The human voice returned, calm, stable, unshaken. Confederation fleet, Admiral Chen said, you are now within controlled engagement space. Krixta leaned forward slightly. Controlled. The word irritated him more than it should have. We are a battle squadron, he replied, not cargo to be controlled. A pause. Then Chen responded, then correct your understanding. No threat. No escalation, just instruction. On the tactical display, something changed. Small shifts in orbital alignment. Not random, not defensive, predictive. Krixta's eyes narrowed. Are they tracking us? Science officer swallowed. They are predicting us. That statement should not have been possible. Prediction required model stability. Model stability required data. and they had not transmitted enough data for this level of certainty. "Admiral," communications officer said suddenly, "incoming system-wide broadcast from multiple orbital nodes." Krixta snapped his attention. "Suppress it." "We cannot." The bridge went silent. Then the human voice expanded across every channel. "Not one source, not one vector, everywhere at once." "Confederation fleet," Chen said, "you are currently positioned for coordinated planetary bombardment." A pause. "We advise you not to proceed." Krixta's mandibles tightened. "And if we do?" he asked again. There was no hesitation in her answer. "Then you will confirm your full engagement profile." That phrasing landed strangely. Not threat. Observation. As if she already knew the answer. Krixta glanced at tactical. "Weapon readiness." "Fully charged," came the reply. "Fleet synchronized." "Then proceed with demonstration strike." Across the formation, energy signatures spiked. 12 warships preparing to fire in perfect coordination. A doctrine refined over millennia. Absolute suppression capability. One world. One strike. End of resistance. Target confirmed. Tactical officer reported. Multiple continental strike points selected. Krixta exhaled. Fire. But nothing happened. For half a second, the fleet obeyed. Then every weapon system paused. Not shut down. Not destroyed. Paused. Krixta froze. What just happened? "Admiral," weapons officer said urgently. "Firing commands were intercepted at execution layer." "By what?" "Silence." "Then, our own command protocols." The words hit harder than any weapon. Krixta turned sharply. "That's impossible." But even as he spoke, his display changed again. Every ship in the squadron highlighted, every firing solution marked, every targeting vector displayed, and beside them, human annotations. They had mapped the entire fleet, not from external scanning alone, from internal behavioral prediction. The human voice returned. "You are experiencing what we call synchronization," Chen said. Krixta's tone dropped. "You are inside our command architecture." A pause. "No," Chen replied. "You are inside our observation model." That distinction mattered, and it terrified him more than he wanted to admit. Science officer spoke, voice tight. "Admiral, they are not just detecting our systems." Another pause. "They are simulating them." Krixta stared at him. "Explain." The officer hesitated. "They are running predictive models of our entire fleet behavior, every possible engagement outcome." Silence followed. Then the tactical display updated itself. Not by Confederation input, by external computation. Thousands of simulated engagement paths appeared, all ending the same way. Krixta's fleet, losing. Not by brute force, by inevitability. He stepped back slightly. For the first time in his career, he did not trust his own tactical interface. The human voice returned again, calm, almost patient. "You are currently evaluating multiple response options," Chen said. A pause. "All of them result in fleet failure within projected timelines." Krixta's mandibles tightened. "This is psychological manipulation." "No," Chen replied simply. "This is accounting." Silence. The word landed heavier than expected, because accounting implied certainty, not probability, not chance. Outcome. Krixta forced his voice steady. "You are still outmatched." A pause. Then Chen responded. "You are still visible." That was all she said. But something in that sentence shifted the atmosphere of the entire bridge. Krixta looked at tactical again. Status of stealth systems? Long silence. Then, "Non-functional," the science officer said quietly. Krixta turned sharply. "That is not possible. They are not being disabled." The officer continued. "They are being ignored." That made no sense. Until it did, because stealth only worked if the observer agreed not to see, and Earth had stopped agreeing. The human fleet shifted, not advancing, not retreating, realigning. Every Confederation ship now found itself subtly reoriented. Contained. Krixta finally understood what had been done. They had not been ambushed. They had been allowed to enter, and now the door was closing behind them. Krixta did not speak for several seconds. For the first time in his command history, silence was not a choice. It was forced. Around him, the bridge of the inevitability conquest had become something unfamiliar. Officers were still in their stations, still reading their instruments, still trained to obey structure. But the structure itself was no longer trustworthy. "Admiral," tactical officer said quietly, "all retreat vectors are changing." Krixta's head snapped toward him. "Changing how?" The officer hesitated. "They are no longer optimal." A pause. Then he corrected himself. "They are no longer viable." Krixta turned back to the main display. The human fleet still had not fired. That was the most disturbing part. They did not need to. The surrounding space had become dense with invisible coordination. Every attempted maneuver by Confederation ships was mirrored, anticipated, and subtly blocked by repositioning human assets. Not aggression, containment, like a net tightening with patience instead of force. Krixta finally spoke. "Open a channel." The communications officer hesitated. "To Earth." "To their command." A pause. Immediately, the channel opened. Admiral Chin appeared again, still calm, still controlled. But now there was something behind her composure that had not been there before. Finality. "You are reconsidering," she said. It was not a question. Krixta's mandibles clicked once. "I am requesting terms for withdrawal." A pause. The first pause that felt heavy. "You are requesting permission to leave," Chun corrected. Krixta did not answer immediately, because she was right, and that realization tasted unfamiliar. "Yes," he admitted finally. "We are requesting safe disengagement." Chin studied him for a moment. Not judgment, assessment. Then she spoke. "You came here assuming superiority." Krixta's jaw tightened. "That is standard Confederation doctrine." "No," Chin replied. "That is standard Confederation history." A pause. Then she continued. "You assumed power was static." Another pause. "You assumed it could not be learned." Krixta's eyes flicked briefly to tactical. Fleet integrity stable. Weapons still charged. But irrelevant. None of it mattered in a system where outcomes were already calculated faster than decisions could form. Chen's voice softened slightly. "You are not the first to arrive with that assumption." That line changed something in the bridge atmosphere. Not fear. Recognition of pattern. Krixta spoke carefully. "What happens now?" Chun did not answer immediately. Instead, the human fleet around them shifted again. Not threatening. Positioning corridors opened. Clear paths through containment zones. But only in one direction. Away. Finally, she spoke. "You leave." A pause. "And you report accurately what you encountered." Krixta narrowed his eyes. "And if we return?" Silence. Then Chin answered. "Then you will already know what is waiting." No boast. No threat. Just certainty. Krixta looked at the tactical display one last time. Every ship in his fleet was intact. No damage. No losses. No casualties. And yet the outcome of the engagement had already been decided without a single exchange of fire. That was the most unsettling victory he had ever witnessed. "Order withdrawal," he said quietly. Relief did not appear on the bridge. Only compliance. The Confederation fleet began to turn. Slowly, carefully, like something aware it was being watched at every step. Engines ignited. Formations shifted. And one by one, the warships disengaged from Earth's orbital space. Not chased. Not destroyed. Allowed. As the fleet accelerated toward jump coordinates, Zexel's voice returned on a private channel. "This will be reviewed by High Command," he said. Krixta did not respond immediately. Then finally, "Make sure they understand one thing." Zexel hesitated. "Yes." Crixta stared at Earth as it shrank behind them. That world was not primitive. A pause. It was unclassified. The channel went silent. Behind them, Earth remained in orbit exactly as before, quiet, blue, still. But now the Confederation fleet understood something it had not understood when it arrived. The difference between a world that had not yet reached space and a world that had already decided no one else would own it. And somewhere far below, humanity did not celebrate. It simply continued building, because contact had not ended. It had only begun to accelerate.